What if you had like a detailed map, a real guide for what comes after this life? Not just, a vague hope, but actual spells, prayers, specific instructions to navigate the unknown. Imagine a whole civilization that didn't just hope for an afterlife, but really meticulously planned for it. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep, really deep, in one of humanity's earliest and honestly most profound guidebooks for the afterlife, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. For this deep dive, we're going to be sifting through these ancient texts, these powerful spells, and some incredible insights from historical sources. We want to uncover its real purpose, its components, and the legacy it left behind. Basically, we're giving you a shortcut to understanding something that's usually wrapped up in a lot of mystery. Not just what it was, but why it mattered so much to them.
It's an absolutely remarkable window, isn't it, into the ancient Egyptian mind. Death wasn't this terrifying end for them. It was a critical transition, something you had to prepare for. And what we call the Book of the Dead, well, it's not a single book like we'd think of today. Not at all. It's actually this huge, evolving collection of funerary texts, magic spells, prayers. These texts were mainly used starting around, say, 1550 BCE. That's the beginning of the New Kingdom, a really vibrant time in Egypt. And they kept using them right up until about 50 BCE, so a very long time.
And when you say used, you mean literally part of the burial process, right? Not just concepts. You'd find these texts written right onto papyrus scrolls and tomb walls, even coffins.
Exactly, inscribed directly onto scrolls, painted onto tomb walls with these amazing pictures written on coffins, physically there with the deceased.
Which really suggests they believed the words themselves had power, like actual protective power.
Precisely. From their perspective, its core purpose was, well, intensely practical, but also deeply spiritual. The fundamental goal was to guide the soul of the deceased. They called it the Ba, which was sort of the mobile personality aspect through this really perilous journey in the afterlife. And that meant actively protecting it from all sorts of dangers believed to be lurking in the underworld, this realm they called the Duat.
The Duat, right? Sounds treacherous.
It was imagined as quite treacherous. And ultimately, this whole elaborate process, all these texts, were designed to ensure a successful judgment before the god Osiris. He was the gatekeeper, essentially. Passing his judgment meant achieving eternal life, a kind of perfected existence. It truly was their ultimate insurance policy for eternity. A spiritual survival guide, you could say.
A spiritual survival guide, I like that. And not just some dusty old book, but dynamic, even personalized. That idea of it being personalized is really interesting. It sort of changes how you think about it compared to, say, the Bible or the Quran, right, which are more fixed. What does this a la carte approach tell us about maybe individual choice in their spiritual life?
That's a really crucial distinction, and it's one of the most fascinating things about these texts. It wasn't static scripture handed down. It was dynamic, always evolving. We know of about 200 spells, hymns, prayers, give or take, that circulated. But here's the really interesting part. The relatives of the person who died didn't just get a standard copy. They actively chose which chapters, which spells, to include from this big collection they had access to.
They chose? Seriously?
Yes, and that choice was often based on a mix of things. Maybe personal preference, certain spells seemed more important, or perhaps more protective, but also, quite practically, it depended on how much they were willing or able to pay for the papyrus scroll.
So you could get like the deluxe afterlife package or the more economy version, depending on your budget. That's incredible. It suggests this fascinating mix of spiritual need, money, and religious flexibility. Does that tell us something about how society was structured in terms of funerary practices?
Oh, it tells us a great deal. This custom selection process, it was especially common before the 26th dynasty. It really speaks volumes about how pragmatic yet deeply spiritual their approach was. The wealthiest person might commission this absolutely beautiful illustrated papyrus with tons of spells, but a more ordinary person might have a much simpler selection, maybe just written on a linen shroud or a cheaper piece of papyrus. So it highlights not just that individual choice, but also the socioeconomic realities. It shows that access to these spiritual tools wasn't uniform. The desire for eternal life was universal, sure, but the means varied. And the Book of the Dead kind of adapted to that, making it accessible, at least to some extent, across different levels of society.
That makes a lot of sense. But wow, it sounds like a nightmare for modern scholars trying to study it. If every copy is potentially unique, a sort of custom playlist for the afterlife, how do you even piece together a definitive understanding? It must create huge translation challenges.
You've absolutely hit on one of the biggest ongoing challenges in Egyptology. As one source bluntly puts it, we are still very far from being able to give a final translation of the Book of the Dead. And it's not just because the language itself is ancient and complex, though it is. It's really compounded by this dynamic, non-standard nature we've been talking about. Imagine trying to create the definitive version of a text that was constantly being adapted and reinterpreted for over 1,000 years.
And what's really fascinating, maybe a bit humbling for us looking back, is that even the ancient Egyptian scribes themselves ran into these problems, didn't they? It kind of shatters that idea of this perfect wisdom being passed down flawlessly.
Absolutely. That's a key detail that often gets missed. Even ancient scribes, when they were copying older texts, often found passages they struggled with. This led to what scholars call corrupt forms. Maybe the text they were copying was damaged, or they just made a mistake. And it also led to conjectural emendations, where scribes basically tried to guess or fill in the blanks in older, maybe fading or obscure manuscripts.
So they were guessing sometimes.
In a way, yes. Trying their best to make sense of it. It shows these texts were living, evolving things. For instance, there's a chapter 9 that exists in a very corrupt form. Restoring it today is largely guesswork based on different fragments.
So they weren't just mindlessly copying, they were interpreting, sometimes struggling with the material they were supposed to preserve.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of that kind of challenge?
Sure. Take the word abtu. Depending on the context, maybe the scribe's understanding, abtu could mean month. Makes sense, right? But another scholar, M. Loray, convincingly showed it could also mean the tortoise of the Nile.
Month or tortoise? That's quite different.
It is. But both seem to come from this root idea of revolving or turning. The moon revolves monthly, the tortoise. Well, maybe it's shell pattern or movement, so there's a link. But the actual meaning in a specific spell could be tricky. Is it about time or this symbolic animal? Another one is the goddess Maftit, usually translated as a lynx goddess, definitely some kind of cat. But her exact role, her specific attributes, might have shifted slightly between different versions of a spell, leading to this sort of fluid understanding. These kinds of things show why a single final translation is so difficult, and why every new discovery can offer fresh insights, or sometimes just more puzzles.
It's like a very high-stakes game of historical telephone. We're not just translating words, we're digging through layers of interpretation. Okay, so let's move from the book itself to the journey it describes. You mentioned the Ba and the Duat. Can you unpack those a bit more? What do they mean for the soul's journey?
Certainly. The Egyptians believed a person was made up of several spiritual parts. The Ba was probably the most dynamic one. Think of it as the personality, the soul's ability to move around. It could leave the tomb, interact with the living world, and, crucially, travel through the afterlife. The Duat, then, was the underworld. It was pictured as this vast, complex, often dangerous place the Ba had to get through.
Dangerous how?
Well, it had rivers, lakes of fire, gates guarded by terrifying beings, lots of gods and spirits who could either help or hinder you. So the texts, the Book of the Dead, were this incredibly practical guidebook. A map, a phrase book, even a book of magic passwords, all to ensure safe passage.
So death wasn't just stopping. It was this big, maybe scary cosmic journey they expected. How did that view of death as a transition, not an end, shape how they lived or what they hoped for?
It shaped everything about their civilization, really. Death wasn't seen as the final curtain. It was a doorway, a transition to a perfected version of earthly life, an ideal continuation. The goal was to reach the field of reeds, which was their version of paradise. You see this belief really clearly in texts like Chapter 179, it says, "I died yesterday, but I come today." It directly links yesterday to death and today to resurrection, continued life.
Wow.
And this wasn't just about spiritual survival. They hoped for a raising up, a resurrection of the body too, but in this immortal, perfect form. This core belief is why they built massive tombs, developed intricate mummification, and why the Book of the Dead was so vital.
That makes the spells even more crucial then. If it's a dangerous journey and you need to be transformed, you need powerful tools, what kinds of things could these words of power actually do for the deceased?
Right. Central to navigating the afterlife were these words of power, like those mentioned in chapter 24. These weren't just pretty poems. They believed these were potent incantations that literally activated magical forces. Many spells were about transformation. For example, several chapters, Helati 7, Selatie, Celsi 6, are specifically called chapter whereby one cometh forth by day.
Coming forth by day. What did that mean exactly?
It was a critical ability. It meant the deceased could leave the darkness of the tomb and the underworld, emerge into the light, maybe the light of the living world, or a celestial version, and interact.
So it wasn't just about existing after death, but about having agency.
Right.
Being able to move around. What was that imagined experience like? Could they, visit relatives?
Exactly. It was about agency and freedom. In Chapter 7-2, for instance, the deceased often speaks directly to the sun god Ra. They assert their right to travel across the sky, mix with the living, see the world again. They might even ask for specific food and water, almost like they're still here. It really blurs that line. The experience was imagined as this liberation from the tomb's confines. The Ba could return temporarily, bask in the sun, remember earthly things. It was a vital contrast to the darkness of the duat they had to navigate.
A powerful vision, moving between worlds. But it wasn't just coming and going, was it? These spells allowed for some incredible shape-shifting, too, becoming powerful creatures or even gods.
Precisely. The texts are full of spells, allowing the deceased to assume all forms which one pleaseth, as Chapter 76 puts it. And this was believed to be real transformation through magic. Imagine becoming the golden hawk, LXE7, or the sacred hawk, LXE8. Powerful symbols of divinity, freedom, flight across the heavens. Other spells allowed transformation into Thoth, the creator god himself, LXXT2, signifying immense power. Or even a swallow, LXXE6, maybe emphasizing speed, adaptability, connection to the sun cycles. These weren't just metaphors. They believed these were actual potent changes, helping the deceased overcome any obstacle or guardian in the afterlife's tricky landscape.
So they could literally become a hawk and fly, or Ptah. That's an astonishing level of, spiritual ambition. But with all these powers, what about the dangers you mentioned? What kind of threats do they need protection from in the duat?
Ah, yes, the duat. Even with magic, it was seen as full of adversaries. So the Book of the Dead has numerous protective spells, specifically designed to repulse these dangers. Chapter 32, for example, is a chapter whereby the crocodiles are repulsed who come to carry off the words of power.
Carry off the words of power. So the crocodiles could steal their spells.
Exactly. That was a specific fear. These weren't just physical threats. They could steal the magical tools needed for survival, leaving the soul vulnerable.
And crocodiles, of course, were a real danger on the Nile. Makes sense they'd show up in the underworld. What other kinds of threats, maybe more mythological ones, did they need to ward off?
Oh, plenty. There were spells against serpents, Chapter 33. Snakes were often symbols of chaos and darkness in Egypt. Not just normal snakes, but monstrous, venomous ones representing evil. Then you have figures like the murder goddesses mentioned in Chapter 37. These are often identified with Isis and Nephthys, who could be protective. But their dual eyes and sometimes ambiguous nature meant they could see into both worlds, making them powerful, maybe unpredictable figures you had to appease correctly.
So tricky deities too,
Yeah.
not just monsters.
Right. They could help, but they could also represent aspects of death, judgment, or mourning. You had to navigate them carefully.
It really does sound like a magical toolkit for the afterlife. But spells alone weren't enough, were they? Were there specific rituals, physical offerings needed to help the deceased?
Absolutely. The texts also give vital instructions for rituals and offerings. These weren't just symbolic. They were seen as crucial for sustaining the deceased. For instance, we know from archaeology and texts about the practice of placing garlands or floral crowns upon the mummies. The mummy of Pharaoh Ahmes I, for example, was found actually wearing a garland of flowers around his neck.
Flowers? What was the idea there?
These beautiful, perishable things were believed to magically regenerate in the afterlife, providing beauty, maybe scent, comfort. Offerings like food, drink, incense were also common, meant to sustain another part of the soul, the ka, and appease the gods.
That's a lovely detail, the flowers. Like a final gift with real spiritual weight. Were there other really specific ritual instructions like that?
Yes, some rubrics are incredibly detailed. There's one in Chapter 121, for example. It gives instructions: set over an earring of the flower Ankamu, put upon the right ear of the deceased person, with another earring put in fine linen, upon which is written the name of N, the deceased's name, on the day of burial.
Wow, that's specific, down to the type of flower in which ear.
Exactly. The Anshamu flower Ansh means life in Egyptian. So this wasn't just jewelry, it was a potent amulet for eternal life. Carefully placed to resonate spiritually, believed to help activate their renewed existence. The level of detail shows how much they believed these physical actions mattered magically.
So burial wasn't just putting a body away, it was this complex, magical ritual activated by these texts. What about help during the journey? Were there gods who actually traveled with the soul?
Definitely. A major goal for the deceased, a sign of real success, was to join the sun god Ra on his daily journey across the sky. The texts are full of this desire to be among the followers of Ra, traveling in his solar boat, the Matit boat by day, the Sektit boat by night.
Sailing with the sun god.
Right. This celestial voyage meant safe passage, but also constant rebirth and renewal, like the sun itself. Divine protection, a glorious path. They'd invoke Ra, the Eternal One, hoping to travel with him without a pause. It wasn't just watching, it was actively participating in the eternal cosmic order, a sign of true triumph over death.
That's a powerful image, sailing with the sun. But before you got that glorious reward, there was that one huge test, wasn't there? The judgment. Let's really focus on that now. The heart of it all.
Yeah.
Ma'at and the divine tribunal.
Yes, this is arguably the absolute make-or-break moment in the whole journey. It's famously described in chapter CXCI, said on arriving at the Hall of Righteousness. Here, the deceased stands before this imposing divine court, presided over by Osiris, the ultimate judge of the dead. The central scene, the one everyone knows, is the weighing of the heart. The deceased heart, which they saw as the seat of intellect, emotion, conscience. Basically, the record of your life is placed on one side of a huge balance scale. And on the other side, the feather of Ma'at.
Ma'at, who's more than just a goddess, right? She was a truth, justice, cosmic order itself.
Exactly. She embodied that universal principle. So your heart, your life's record, was weighed against ultimate truth and balance.
And how did they make sure the scales themselves were fair? I mean, this is eternity we're talking about.
That's a great question. It shows how concerned they were with fairness, precision. The balance wasn't just any old scale. A note in chapter 12 described it having a plummet, like a plumb bob, to test its level. This ensured the beam was perfectly horizontal, the tongue perfectly vertical, guaranteed an accurate, impartial weigh-in. If the heart balanced against the feather, meaning your life was lived according to Ma'at, you were declared true of voice, worthy, and you got eternal life. But if the heart was heavy with sin, unbalanced, the consequences were final.
And that's where the terrifying creature Amit comes in, the devourer.
Precisely. An unbalanced heart meant you were handed over to be devoured by Amit. Amit was this fearsome monster goddess, often shown as part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, all the things Egyptians feared most, really.
Oh, yeah.
She consumed the unworthy heart and effectively the soul. This wasn't just punishment, it was complete annihilation in the afterlife. A second death, the ultimate terror, from which there was no coming back. A very strong motivator to live righteously on earth.
A powerful deterrent, absolutely. So how did the deceased actually make their case? They didn't just stand there silently while their heart was weighed, did they?
Oh no, far from passive. This is where the famous negative confession comes in. It's the second part of chapter CXXI. It's this long, detailed declaration where the deceased actively proclaims their innocence. And not just in general terms. They address 42 specific divine judges, each associated with a particular type of sin, and deny committing it. It's a powerful demonstration that they knew the rules of Ma'at and lived by them.
42 judges. Wow. What kind of things did they have to deny? Was it like the 10 Commandments or more specific?
Remarkably specific, covering a huge range of ethical and social behavior. The deceased would address each judge by name and title like, "O thou of the nose, who appears at Shemunu, I have not been evil-minded." Or, "O eater of the shadow, I have not been rapacious." The list goes on. "I have not done wrong to men. I have not killed my kindred. I have not told lies instead of truth. I am not aware of treason. I have not caused mischief."
It's like a checklist of a moral life.
Exactly. It really emphasizes how central morality, ethics, truth, Ma'at were to their religion. It wasn't just about rituals, it was about how you lived your life every day. It shows a really developed moral code.
Yeah, okay. That sounds incredibly stressful. Standing before 42 gods, declaring your innocence, while your own heart is on the scale potentially betraying you. What if your heart did kind of, testify against you? Is there anything you could do? A spell for that?
Ah, yes. That brings us to a really crucial spell, spell 30B. It's this incredibly poignant plea designed specifically to stop the heart from betraying the soul at that critical moment. See, the Egyptians had this profound respect for the heart. It wasn't just an organ, it was the core of who you were. Your consciousness, memory, moral compass. Our sources even point out two words for heart. Ab, which is more like the lively spirit, the conscious self, and Katu, its physical aspect. Both were vital.
So Ab is the inner self, Katu is the physical heart on the scale.
Sort of, yes. The Ab was the essence, the Katu was its manifestation. Spell 30B is basically the deceased talking to their own heart, their Ab.
Talking to their own heart. What did they say?
It's an urgent appeal. It says something like, "Oh, my heart, Do not stand up against me as a witness. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. Do not weigh heavy against me. In the presence of the keeper of the balance, you are my Ka within my body, the Khnum who makes my limbs sound. It calls the heart my genius, who art by me, the artist who gives soundness to my limbs.
Wow, my genius, the artist. That's beautiful.
It is. It's pleading for integrity, asking its own duppus self not to condemn it based on past actions. It's asking the heart to remember the whole person, the intentions perhaps, a plea for self-compassion almost at the moment of judgment.
That adds such a layer of psychological depth. Okay, so we have Osiris as the main judge. Who else was involved in this divine courtroom drama?
While besides Osiris presiding, several other key deities were essential. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, was the guide. He led the soul through the underworld to the judgment hall. He was also like the court usher, making sure everything was in order. Chapter 17 even mentions him fixing the places of the seven glorious ones, suggesting he organized the divine court.
Okay, Anubis, the guide and organizer, and Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. I bet he was taking notes.
You bet correctly. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, was the indispensable divine scribe. He meticulously recorded the whole proceeding, the negative confession, the result of the weighing. He ensured cosmic accuracy and justice. Chapter 18 calls him the one who makes Osiris triumphant over his adversaries, highlighting his role in upholding divine law through wisdom. Later texts, like Chapter 183, call him the Lord of Laws, who pacifies the two earths by the power of his wisdom. He was crucial for maintaining order and the authority of the judgment.
So Osiris judges, Anubis guides, Thoth records, a pretty serious setup. And Ra, the sun god, where did he fit in here? Was he part of the judgment?
Ra was less involved in the judgment itself, more connected to the outcome, the reward. He represented rebirth, the eternal cycle. The ultimate goal after passing judgment was to join Ra in his solar boat, sailing across the heavens forever. That journey, as we mentioned from chapters 7 and 12, and the Mati and Sektit boats, symbolized successfully passing the test and achieving eternal renewal. So, while not in the courtroom, Ra represented the glorious destination, the reason for undergoing the judgment in the first place. Each god had their specific, vital role.
It's such an intricate system.
Yeah.
Judgment, transformation, all held together by this core moral code. So let's zoom out a bit. What does all this symbolism mean in the bigger picture of their beliefs? How did it connect to daily life? Ma'at seems to be the absolute key, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Ma'at is the linchpin. She's more than just a concept. She's the force holding everything together. Truth, justice, balance, cosmic harmony, doing right by others. It wasn't just an afterlife thing. It was the principle for living a good life on Earth, ensuring society functioned properly. When your heart was weighed against her feather, it was judging your whole life's alignment with this cosmic truth. As chapter 104 says, the law is raised to the nose of Ra, meaning Ma'at has ultimate divine approval. Living by it was crucial for personal salvation and a stable world.
So living right wasn't just about getting into heaven. It was about keeping the whole universe in balance. That connects to their view of death too, doesn't it?
Precisely. The Book of the Dead constantly reinforces this idea. Death isn't the end, it's a transition. A doorway to an afterlife that was basically a perfected version of Egypt. No sickness, no hunger, no death, just the good parts of life eternally. Spells for coming forth by day show this desire for continued activity, light, engagement with the world.
And the focus on food, like in chapter 158, food, nourishment, and dainties, that really drives home. They expected to enjoy eternity, right? Like an endless, perfect picnic.
Exactly. They wanted a blissful continuation. Chapter 179 again. I died yesterday, but I come today. Death, then rebirth into this better existence. And central to that was preserving the physical body. Mummification was so vital because the body was the anchor for the soul, the ba, in eternity. The fear of decay was intense. Chapter 154 describes it in pretty graphic detail.
How graphic?
It talks about bones rotting, flesh becoming fetid, liquid, breath stinking, the body becoming a multitude of worms. Really visceral stuff. It shows why they went to such incredible lengths with embalming to prevent that horror and ensure the body lasted forever for the soul.
Definitely paints a picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this moral code, this view of life, death, and the body. What about the gods themselves? The Book of the Dead is packed with them.
Oh, it's a who's who of the Egyptian pantheon. It gives us amazing insight into their cosmology. You find key creator gods like Chapera, called self-originating in chapter 24, representing the morning sun, rebirth. Tamu, often linked with Ra, representing the setting sun, completion. Then the essential pairs from the creation myths. Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess, holding up the cosmos.
And those four figures often seen on canopic jars. The children of Horus, they were important too.
Very important, especially in the funerary context. Amset, Hapi, Duamutef, and Kabessinuf. They were the guardians of the internal organs placed in the canopic jars during mummification. Each protected a specific organ. You often see them depicted standing on a lotus flower in front of Osiris during the judgment scene, still performing their protective role. And linked to the gods is this fascinating idea of nomina numina.
Nomina numina, what's that?
It's the idea, mentioned in a note to chapter 17, that the names of the gods were intrinsically powerful, tied to their very essence and attributes. Knowing the name gave you a connection, maybe some influence. It suggests the name was the power, not just a label, even thousands of years ago.
The name is the power. That's fascinating. What did that mean practically? Like if you knew a god's secret name, well, what about your own name?
Knowing a god's true or secret name was thought to grant you some power over them, or at least allow you to invoke their help more effectively. The name held the essence, and this applied to humans too. Your name was vital for your existence here and in the afterlife. That's why having your name hacked off a monument, which sometimes happened to disgraced figures, was so devastating. It was an attempt at eternal annihilation. If your name was gone, how could you be called upon in the afterlife? How could offerings be made to you? It meant non-existence. It really shows the magical power they attributed to language.
Chilling. To be erased just by destroying your name, it makes words seem incredibly powerful. And the Ennead, that group of 9 gods, how do they fit in?
The Ennead, which just means group of 9, was a key theological structure. Usually it referred to the main gods of the Heliopolitan creation myth. That's typically Ra-Atum, the creator, his children Shu and Tefnut, their children Geb and Nut, and their children Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. This group formed the core pantheon, explaining the creation of the cosmos and the fundamental forces governing the world and the afterlife. It provided a structured way to understand the divine family tree, so to speak.
Okay, so this whole incredibly detailed system, spells, judgment, gods, rituals, sounds like a massive undertaking. Who actually got to have a Book of the Dead? Was this just for pharaohs and the super rich?
That's a really important point regarding its significance. While the most beautiful, complete, and lavishly illustrated versions, like the famous Papyrus of Ani, definitely belong to wealthy officials and royalty, it wasn't exclusively for them. Versions of the Book of the Dead, or at least selections of spells from it, have been found in the tombs of people who were clearly not from the absolute elite. Commoners, you might say. This shows just how widespread its importance was across Egyptian society.
So even if you could only afford a few key spells written on a bit of linen, you still wanted something from this guide. The desire for a safe afterlife was universal.
It seemed so. The aspiration was incredibly pervasive. We see this in the sheer number and variety finds. There are famous manuscripts like the Nibseni Papyrus, the Turin Totten Book, texts from the coffins of nobles like Mentuhotep and Horhotep, fragments and texts even found in royal tombs like those of Ramesses V and VI, associated with the mummy of Ams's tomb of Chaim Hait. The range is huge, showing it was a central part of death rituals for many, though obviously tailored to their means.
It's just an incredible treasure trove for us today then, giving us such a direct look into their beliefs.
Absolutely unparalleled. The level of detail in these texts is just staggering. It's our primary source for understanding so much about ancient Egyptian religion, their mythology, their cosmology, their ethics, the descriptions of the gods, the underworld, the rituals, the moral expectations. It's provided invaluable insights. Honestly, without the Book of the Dead, our picture of ancient Egypt would be so much poorer. It's arguably the single most important window into their spiritual world.
And yet, despite all this study, there's still this sense of mystery around it, isn't there? Like, we don't know everything.
Oh, definitely. And the ancient Egyptians might have intended that. There's this amazing line in the instructions, the rubric, for chapter 162. It says, quite clearly, "Do not reveal it to anyone, may he be thy father or thy son, except thyself. It is a real mystery, and every one of these things is unknown to all men."
Wow. Keep it secret, even from family.
Exactly. It underlines that some of this knowledge was considered deeply sacred, maybe esoteric, meant only for the deceased on their journey, or perhaps for priestly initiates. It reminds us we're looking at something profoundly personal and deeply revered.
A real mystery.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It tells us we're dealing with something incredibly sacred. So bringing it all together, how does this ancient guide resonate today? What's its relevance now, thousands of years later?
I think its relevance is huge and lasting. The Book of the Dead is still studied intensely, not just as history, but as one of the very first comprehensive attempts by humans to map the afterlife. Its sophisticated ideas about judgment, morality, the soul's journey, these have undoubtedly echoed through millennia, influencing later religious and philosophical thought in ways we probably don't even fully realize. It remains this powerful symbol of the ancient Egyptian fascination with immortality, their deep belief in life continuing, and their incredibly elaborate preparations for it. It really speaks to that universal human urge to understand, prepare for, and maybe even conquer death.
So we've journeyed through the Egyptian Book of the Dead, from those personalized spell lists to that intense judgment scene before Osiris, all guided by Ma'at. We've seen their profound belief that death was just a doorway, needing careful navigation with rituals, magic, and divine help, leading to a perfected eternal life. We've touched on the challenges, even for ancient scribes, in understanding these sacred words.
And what this deep dive really shows, I think, is something beyond just ancient myths. It's this fundamental human desire, isn't it? The desire to prepare for what we don't know, to leave some kind of mark, to find our place in the big picture of existence. The Book of the Dead is this incredible testament to humanity's age-old quest to bring order, meaning, and hope to the mystery of what comes next.
So as you think about the Egyptians and their meticulous planning for their journey beyond this life, maybe consider this. What guidebook are you writing consciously or maybe unconsciously for your own legacy, for the afterlife of your impact, your ideas, your work? What steps are you taking now to prepare for the echoes you'll leave behind, and what truth ultimately will weigh on your own heart?